Welcome to Season 4 of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, Wealth Advisor at Moxie Wealth Management. Today on the show, we chat with consultant Jay Allen, author of the book Bucketheads and founding partner of Masters Alliance. Jay shares with us how his time in the Navy influenced how he leads others, how he helps Fortune 500 companies with employee retention and engagement, and the 3 guiding principles that he refers to as buckets that help transform businesses. Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Pleasure to be on.
Yeah, it's good to see. Of course, we're recording through Zoom, still going through the pandemic, and so we don't have face-to-face in studio, but on Zoom is the next best thing for us.
Agreed.
In a moment, we'll get into your firm, Masters Alliance, and some of the stuff that you're doing. But to begin with, I know you were in the Navy as a young man. I'm curious what the experience was like and how that influenced the rest of your life.
It was fundamental and foundation to almost everything I've been able to achieve in the rest of my career.
That's a big statement.
It was challenging. It was extreme independence. I was on a destroyer escort, and when we're out at seas chasing subs or looking for subs or under certain conditions where we didn't know if we were going to get knocked, hit, or sunk by a sub, that's attention getting.
Right.
And when you're out at sea, and sometimes we were a single ship, we weren't in flotilla. And when we're out at sea, there's no calling home. We have to make all the decisions, and they're instant decisions, and we have to provide for ourselves. And things go wrong, and we have to fix it. Electronics goes down, other things go down. People get sick. And I found out that I could survive and thrive in that kind of an environment. And I was always out over my skis because I got promoted and I'd get promoted and I'd get promoted again. Mm-hmm. And I'd say to the captain, but I'm not sure I know how to do that. And he would say, you will learn how to do it. I have confidence in you. And it's yours tomorrow. And there was training involved, Navy schools sometimes. You can start to see how that's foundational and fundamental.
It sounds like for all the experiences that, or the leadership roles that you were put into in the Navy, it almost forced you to expand your horizons and your confidence of what you can accomplish.
I think that's true. And it helped me also observe, as a very young person, the kind of leadership that I wanted to emulate and the kind of leadership that I wanted to ignore or make sure I didn't fall into.
Explain that for me a little.
Well, I operated under 2 different captains in the time I stayed on the same ship until we put it out of commission in Philadelphia, but that's another story. And the captains were of great contrast. I very carefully decided I didn't want to be the same kind of leader as one captain and was able to, in that environment, be a different kind of leader, even though I took some static. Mm-hmm. And then the other leader was one that I thought I wanted to emulate. And it was a wonderful growth opportunity in both cases.
And what would you say are the characteristics of the leader you wanted to be like?
First of all, he was confident in himself, and he had a very clear vision or picture of what an excellent state of this outstanding ship should look like and be like and operate like and behave like. And then he asked us as his officers what we thought and what our goals were. And he engaged us in that. That is the connection to me doing these other things when I got out of the Navy, because I watched him in action. And he was thorough, he was demanding, he was fair, and he allowed us a lot of freedom. And no matter what the intensity, we figured out a way to have fun. And we figured out a way to help our men have fun. And that was his style.
So how long were you in the Navy?
3.5 years.
So you're in the Navy 3.5 years. And then where did you start working in Manhattan?
Oh, actually, a fellow officer of mine went to work with Young and Rubicam Advertising and Marketing in Manhattan. They were number 3 in the world at the time, and that was not on my career path. I had offers for PerkinElmer, which was a high-tech engineering organization, and I had an offer with Bank of America International for 6 different countries, 6 months each as part of a training program. And I said to the Bank of America people, that's the best offer I ever expected to get. But you remember, I've been at sea. I've been in the Navy for 3.5 years.
Right.
And I'd like a lot more hamburgers, milkshakes, and women. And I don't want to go spend 6 months in 6 different countries.
Right.
And so that's how I ended up at Young and Rubicam. And it was a great experience because I was on the account side with a tremendous marketing firm that really introduced me to what I would call the excitement of understanding customers, and put me out in places where I had to understand customers face to face and up front. And then strategically, one of my clients was Procter & Gamble.
Okay.
And the demands exceeded anything I'd ever experienced in my life on me stepping up my game.
Tougher than the Navy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, remarkable to say that, but it was, I remember the very first meeting I had with Procter & Gamble. I knew it was going to be tough, and I worked to get ready. And then after the meeting, my supervisor called me in. He's actually one of Jay's legends in my book, Dewey Roberts. And he said, Jay, I've got good news and bad news. And I said, what's that? And he said, you survived. Next, he said, unless you can step up your game, the client doesn't want to see you again.
Wow.
And I said, Dewey, why didn't you tell me? He said, if I'd told you, you might not even have survived. At least you knew going in that you thought you had a chance. And so, but that went on. And they sent me to test markets, and they sent me other places. I was in my 20s when I found myself presenting to the board of directors of Goodyear Tire and Rubber because they wanted a young guy's opinion. What an experience.
Well, and just so I can get a better understanding, when you're in front of that group, what are you encouraging them to do? Is it how to advertise? Is it how to connect with customers? What are you really trying to influence?
There were several types of agencies in that day. There were the purely creative, and then there were the purely marketing. And Young and Rubicam was successful because it was a blend of both. So the direct answer to your question was, the advertising wasn't exactly secondary, but it was following the market insight, the customer insight, the competitive analysis, the supplier inclusion, the whole business proposition. And that was such a wonderful foundation to have to absorb and survive, I guess, in that intense environment of making a difference in markets. Because if we didn't make a difference, we didn't have the business.
Well, and aren't advertising agencies able to get way more data on customers today than they were able to years ago?
Actually, I might turn that upside down.
Really?
Yes, because today there's a greater dependence on education and the study of what goes on. And I'm not pouncing on MBAs, but MBAs have an expectation, the new ones, the younger ones, that they will achieve certain things right away. And in those days, part of our assimilation or training was to be put out in the marketplace and find out what was going on and go with people as we traveled to supermarkets, go with the people that were stocking shelves, look what was going on at the checkout counter, observe customers along the way. I was sent as a very young guy to a tire test market in Kansas City. They said, go out there for a week, take a lot of notes, go out to at least 8 to 10 tire dealers a day, make your notes at night, and come back and bring us your report. And so I got to see that world of what goes on in those marketplaces. And so many people today have, I call it, missed that experience. Sometimes people say we avoided that experience, but there's a great cost to that avoidance. So that it's a blend of, once you understand how that works out in the field and with the customers and in markets, because you're learning about competition. You run into people that actually supply raw materials to some of the products and supply things to the service. And so you're able to blend that face-to-face experience, which doesn't take a lot of time, with the mounds of research and things like that, and put the two together. And out of that comes some real difference makers in the marketplace.
I was just thinking, to me, that it feels like people would lean on digital information versus face-to-face information. Is that true? Or in an advertising space, is it still test groups and, you know what I mean, where you've got real life people?
I can't speak to the advertising space because that was a one stop in my career.
Oh, got it.
Because then I went into what the advertising people called the dark side. I went into corporate life. But I can speak to the idea of organizations that can become over-dependent on the statistics and not sufficiently looking into what's really going on in the marketplace. Another piece of that, Joe, is more and more today, from my experience with so many clients in so many industries in so many countries, is that there's a tendency for a certain group of people to be close to the customer in an organization. And what we've found over the years of the decades is that we can figure out a way to connect anybody to the customer. Our work with Microsoft Central Europe, Christian Vidal, the CEO at the time, challenged us. He said, okay, Jay, I've got a challenge. Your firm can't connect accounts payable to the customer. And we, through a team, helped that happen and have found tremendous competitive advantage for Microsoft by doing that. So the thing that is really missing is connecting people throughout the organization to the customer and what's going on in the marketplace. And it sounds like a big effort, but it's not. But that's where the fun is.
Right.
That's what gets people up in the morning to go to work in a corporate life. Absent that, the engagement scores are low. So people sometimes say, well, how do you get the engagement scores up? And I say, well, that's pretty simple. You create some excitement about what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on with customers, where the difference-making opportunities are, and people get up in the morning and want to participate because that's exciting. And then it has a further benefit. It creates something, a buzz in an organization, no matter what the size. And then people hear about the buzz because we all have friends.
Right.
And so recruiting and retention improves. It sounds so simple, but it's a triple win.
So now tell me about your firm, Masters Alliance. What type of companies do you work with, and what kind of work do you do?
As an introduction, I think it's important to understand that our firm works exclusively with companies that are really good at what they do. Sometimes we get the question, well, you all are in the consulting business, so you must help a lot of troubled companies. And our answer is no. What we do with organizations, and it's not just companies, we do nonprofit work, we do government work. It is those companies that really want to make a difference in their marketplaces, that really want to make a difference in their customers, want to be inclusive with their suppliers, really understand their communities and their people and want to make something happen. They're at the top of their game. The reason that they would come to us is they have this passion to get better. When we did work with Kellogg, the CEO at the time, Bill Lamoth, he's also one of Jay's legends in my book. He said, Jay, do you know how much more trouble it is to stay on top than it is to get on top? And at that time, they were in Business Week's top 5 return on equity companies 3 years running. So they were on top. But he said, we'll leave no rock unturned to try to get better. And that's why you're here.
Is that common or uncommon for the successful people to still be that competitive, to keep pushing themselves?
It is becoming increasingly uncommon. 30 years ago, in my estimation, about 30% of the leaders in organizations got it. These are round numbers. 20 years ago, it was about 20% that got it. 10 years ago, it was about 10% that got it. Today, I think it's about 5%.
Wow.
And there's a fellow that came in to speak to us, about 50 of us in a room, a Harvard professor, decades or so back. And this subject came up because we had an interactive session. And he said, well, we in the business schools have actually caused this problem. And we said, really? Why? And he said, because we have been almost singularly focused on finance rather than competitive advantage, markets and customers, et cetera.
So are you making money? And if you're making money, that's the definition.
Everything must be okay. And so what that omits is, what are you leaving on the table? What customer and market opportunities are you not exploring because the current customer and market opportunities are this profitable? What corner are you not looking around?
So you have something called the 3 buckets, and the buckets being strategic leadership, customer connection, and then aggressive implementation. So let's start with the first bucket, strategic leadership. Tell me about that.
Strategic leadership absolutely includes strategic planning, but it begins with strategic thinking. Sometimes people want to do a strategic plan. We're all for that. That's great. And we help people do that. But to start with a strategic plan concept tends to omit the strategic thinking part. And if you omit the strategic thinking part, then the temptation in a strategic planning process is kind of pick up where you left off last year.
Right.
The strategic thinking process, throw out last year and bring it back where it's appropriate. But let's really dig in and think about customers and markets, et cetera.
What is that process for strategic thinking? You know, people talk about like a SWOT analysis.
Well, actually, we use something called a SWOT analysis, but we do it with strengths, threats, weaknesses, and opportunities. And the idea is if you were in a battle and you just put your strengths down and your weaknesses down and omitted the threats, you wouldn't know what your weaknesses were before you went into the battle or a chess game or whatever else, because the weaknesses actually came before the threats. So we actually do a SWO or something like that.
Right.
Strengths, threats, weaknesses, and opportunities. And so that's part of it. But the process generally is we come into an organization, as we did with Kellogg, do a series of interviews, we do a series of focus groups, and we find out, Bill Lamo's command was, go into the organization and find out, no matter how successful we are, what we're missing, what people are trying to tell us and the execs are not listening to, what the execs are trying to tell me as a CEO and I'm not listening to, and what the market's trying to tell us that none of us is listening to. And get in there and find out, because there are going to be people in my organization that know the answers to that. So go find them. And then as a result of that, we went off to an offsite in Orlando, and his introductory comments, because he'd seen the information ahead of time, he said, well, to his executive team, well, I think Jay found out more about us than any of us wants to know. And so it starts with that quick discovery.
Right.
And then based on that, we bring to the team or the teams what has surfaced from that discovery. Opportunities that are missed, problems that aren't getting addressed, things that need to change, opportunities for transformation that bubble. And one of the questions we ask, I actually learned this from Joel Barker, the futurist, many decades ago. What appears to be impossible to do in your industry that if it could be done would dramatically change the industry and your approach to markets and customers? And out of that impossible task and impossible ideas starts the strategic thinking. And then we work it down into how we're going to get it across. Then that second bucket that I mentioned, connecting with customers, that's an instrumental part of that. And then, of course, if you don't get it executed, that's a waste of time. And we help organization execute in 100 or so days what normally in their organization takes 2 years.
How often do the leadership teams, when you come in with your initial finding, view what you're finding as maybe their own weakness? In other words, do they push back because they don't like somebody else telling them how to do what they're doing, or somebody else to hold up the mirror and tell them that, there's all these opportunities? How often does that get received poorly?
Well, not as often as you would think. It would maybe seem obvious, but there's a unique thing that happens. We always find out enough things that they already knew.
Okay.
So when we're presenting the results, that gives them a chance to say, you guys are pretty stupid. We already knew that part.
Right.
And then we say, great, congratulations, we confirmed that for you. And then we go on to some of the other parts, and they're kind of silent. And then always there's somebody that almost always somebody that breaks the ice and says, wow, we've never even talked about that. Or, remember, we talked about that and didn't do anything about it. The only time I can recall out of 120 some clients that ice didn't get broken was with Manhattan Life Insurance, and Donald Fordyce was the CEO, and we were again on an offsite, and I actually counted there was 7 minutes of silence.
Oh.
And He looked at me and I just smiled. So he said in front of the group, obviously, Jay, I don't know the limits of your patience. I can't wait any longer. So we got into it in a different way. But that's a very good question, because on appearances, you would think there would be a lot of resistance. Mm-hmm. A lot of that resistance is actually overcome in the interview process. And then we also do some focus groups with people that are closer to the customer, et cetera. So we bring a body of information and facts to the table that you almost have to hang up your brain to not at least look at.
Right. So one of the other things you mentioned was the customer connection. What are some examples of how you've helped to guide companies to change how they connect with customers? It sounds like this is an important thing to energize most employees and leadership team at organizations, is being connected to the customers. Is that right?
That is absolutely right. I could give the wrong impression about research. We love research. We dig into research. We use research. In some cases where we could be called a research junkie. We want to find out what's going on. Mm-hmm. The other side of the coin, though, is the people's experience. We have a process called Beyond Demographics, the Character of the Customer, which we gather cross-functionally through the organization and geographically through the organization, people together to talk about what's going on with their customers. Mm-hmm. And it's oversimplification, but it's actually a different way of thinking about segmentation. And I can give you a quick example. It's remarkable the segments only come down to about 4 to 7 segments. It seems totally illogical. That can't be for any product, any service, any company. Different divisions, of course, would be different. But with United Airlines, for instance, the demographic way of thinking about customers in the airline industry was traditionally, well, you're a business customer, you're a leisure customer, you're some kind of, those are demographic. You're an age group customer, a school participant going somewhere. Mm-hmm. The Beyond Demographics, now they violated the rule between 4 and 7 because they wanted 8, but the Beyond Demographics, for instance, illustrated that there were 3 kinds of business travelers. There was the road warrior, which others have said they invented, but United Airlines actually invented it. They're the reluctant corporate travelers, and they're the eager corporate travelers. Now, those are different kinds of folks.
Right.
I think an easy to understand example, and this goes through any kind of organization, I think, is, so I was at O'Hare Airport at the United check-in, and they have these little kiosk kind of things they did back then. And 3 people raced up and said, we got to catch the flight. We have to catch the flight. And so this attendant at the counter asked them 3 specific questions. And then she got on the phone and said, hold the plane. And I thought, oh my gosh, nobody holds a plane.
Wow.
And so I followed them through security. And at United in O'Hare, there were like 8 or 9 security booths. And so they split up. I went through a 4th one, and then their gate was actually 10B off to the right when we got through. So I followed them to the gate. Mm-hmm. They all had their boarding passes ready. They slot them through the machine. They got on, and the gate attendant slammed the door right behind them. And I said to her, why did you hold a plane for these people? And she said, well, they're road warriors. I said, what does that mean? I mean, I knew the answer because we looked at the profile.
Right.
But she said, well, you don't understand, sir. Road warriors will race down there. They know what the number of their seat is, and they know exactly where that seat is because they're road warriors. And they'll sit down, buckle up, shut up, and we'll pull back. They won't take off their jackets. They'll put their luggage under the seat in front of them, their roller bag, even though it's no foot room. And they won't ask questions. They don't object. They're not a reluctant corporate traveler who is whining about where can I put my bag.
Right.
She said, we're talking from the time they leave the door to no more than 2 minutes before they're buckled up. Said we could hold the plane for them. If we held the plane for a leisure traveler, a vacation traveler, or a reluctant corporate traveler, we'd be 15 minutes late out of the gate. So the key to that story is those categories had names, and the names had descriptions. And behind those descriptions were questions you asked to find out what category they're in. And it permeated the whole organization. You could do a lot of research and things like that, but if you didn't have names for your segments that people could universally understand through your organization, and we've done that with dozens of companies. And when the group comes up with the names, we actually have to ask the group to clean up a few names because they're not all positive. But people remember them.
Yeah, that's great. That's interesting. The third item here that you had mentioned that I wanted to talk about was you talked about once you figured out a strategy there that you took a wildly aggressive implementation. And I think by your definition is generally trying in the first 100 days to try to implement some of these changes. If you're working with Fortune 500 companies, I imagine the normal process is years to implement things like this. How do you get that done in 100 days?
How do we do it? Part of it is identifying those things that are really meaningful to the company and the organization and the marketplace. Mm-hmm. That attracts people. We tell anybody that wants to volunteer that it's going to be 100 to 120 days. It used to be 100, but people are so busy now, it really is about 120 days. That each team will make presentations in front of senior management every 35 days, and that will give them exposure. And once again, the key thing is the people that are really, really busy, that can't do anything else, that have nothing else that they could add to their plate, can always, on their own, decide to suck it up for 100, 120 days.
Yeah,
because they know it's going to be over.
Right.
The normal corporate project thing is it goes on and it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. And it's meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. You can't do that when you're going to do it fast. There was a guy by the name of Gavin who was once the CEO of Motorola, and he reduced the close the book time from 44 days to 7 days. And I remember an analyst asking him, how did you do that? He said, well, you know, when you reduce it from 44 days to 7 days and close the book of a major international corporation, he said, you can't fool around. You can't get 74 opinions on each thing.
Right.
You have to know what you're doing. You have to set it up ahead of time, and you have to have the criteria for what's going to be plus, what's going to be minus, and you do it. And that's kind of the idea with these teams.
So I'm curious, when you're working with companies, how do you go about establishing metrics or goals with the companies you help? Are you focusing on numbers? Are you focusing on a mission? Maybe, for example, customer experience. How do you handle that?
Actually, we never present those goals. We ask them what they think.
Okay.
You've really hit on something, though. Quite frequently, they start with the numbers. And the numbers are quite frequently incremental. And so we say, well, how satisfying is 4.2% annual compound growth?
Right.
Well, yeah, we're doing this and we're making our money and our stock price is up, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
What's your market share doing? Well, it goes silent sometimes.
Right.
What do your people feel about this? Well, we've got good people. What are your engagement scores? Well, they could be better. And so we kind of go at that in different directions and guide them to the conclusion that maybe they ought to have very thoughtful, aggressive strategies to make that difference and then get bigger numbers than they'd thought of. Of course, the question they ask, well, how's that possible? And that's how we provide the guidance to move them along the path that how that is possible.
Is some of the stuff you do to help in a corporate setting and how you drive a business forward, is there a lot of similarities, or could it be useful for an individual, like how they were trying to guide themselves personally, whether it's personal or professional career, self-evaluation in how you go about life?
Very definitely. As a result of this way of thinking, we get feedback from people later on. A woman flew in from Wyoming who had moved there to do something quite differently. And she established her small business. And she wanted to have a drink with two of us who had helped her when she was with a big client. Mm-hmm. She said, I'm still using this. I'm using it in my small business. I've got a small group at church. And she said, my husband and I actually think about it on how we're going to do it with ourselves. She said, the mystery is none of this is rocket science. Actually, I came across a quote from Henry Ford just in the past few days. Thinking is the hardest work, which is why so few engage in it frequently.
Right.
And So we provide some techniques and tools and paths for people to think through these. So we say to our clients, what we don't want you to do during our work is ever be faced with a totally blank sheet of paper. We want to have something on that piece of paper or on that whiteboard or something that says, this is the starting point on this topic. These are some examples of where you could end up at this topic. And then together, let's figure out how to fill in the middle as it relates to your organization, whether it's a corporation, a faith group, a government organization, a nonprofit.
So I've got just a number of other questions kind of getting more personally towards your thought process on things and leadership and your own company. What right now, when you think about the idea of consulting folks and helping their organizations get better, is there something right now that you're personally trying to get better at?
I love that question. My passion, I'm almost on a campaign that I've been on for a long time, but my passion is helping others have fun at work, to be more meaningfully fulfilled with what they do, to figure out ways to get up and go to work and be excited. At the end of 2019, as a breakfast sponsor of a good leadership breakfast, we're about 250 people in the room. And as a sponsor, I had a little bit of stage time. So I asked people, raise your hand if you've had fun at work in 2019. I got scoffs and laughs and a couple of hisses and right up front, are you nuts? And 10 or 12 hands went up.
Yeah.
And I said to the folks, well, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is there's no excuse for that. The good news is you can make the difference and you can start it. And you shouldn't settle for less. And one of the chapters in my book is the burden of regret is greater than the risk of leading. So what I'm trying to get better at myself is figuring out more creative ways to get that message across, to help people implement it, and to apply it vigorously, regardless of the circumstances, including during COVID. Mm-hmm. We've reinvented several of our processes to be able to do it virtually, working with Cisco and others to help do that virtually. I didn't think it'd be possible, of course. See, so here's the shoemaker without shoes. Oh, I don't think that could be. How could we do that?
Right.
But somebody in our group said, Jay, look in the mirror. Right. What have you been talking about all these years?
Right.
Let's go find out. Right. So we did.
Of course, this podcast is learning stories of how people became successful. And one of the things we always like to ask our guests is, how would you define being successful?
Making a difference and being the difference. Simple as that. Because if you make a difference, you're going to impact others positively and you're going to get your own rewards of satisfaction. If you be the difference, you're going to be the model so others can see it, like I experienced in the Navy and I've experienced other places. I don't want to make it too complicated. Make a difference and be the difference. And there's a pizza delivery guy in a small town by the name of Tipton, and I can't remember what state it's in. It just came up in the last month. He said, the only job you know that can make the world a better place is your job. You might have observed other jobs, but you're not certain. But the only job you absolutely know as a fact can make a difference is your job.
Profound words, Jay. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to share the details of the work you've been doing for businesses and government agencies and nonprofits, as well as the ideas we talked about for personal improvement. Thanks for being part of the show today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
You've been listening to Jay Allen, author of the book Bucketheads and founding partner of Masters Alliance. You can learn more about his book at bucketheadsthebook.com and his company at mastersalliance.com. Thanks for listening to the Season 4 finale of the Ascent Podcast, a show about inspiring people who explain their path to achievement. I'm your host, Joe Burgess, wealth advisor and founding partner of Moxie Wealth Management. You can learn more about me and my firm at moxiewealthmanagement.com. That's MOXIE wealthmanagement.com. Be sure to subscribe and look for Season 5 in the near future. We'll see you next time.